Hi everybody! Welcome back to Dark Souls 2. This is still Daz. Today we're going to make some actual progress instead of milling around places we've already been. To facilitate this progress, we're going to be using the Twin Blade for a little bit. I showed it off a little bit last time, but now I'm actually going to show it off against actual enemies instead of nothing. To continue on our journey, we need to go back to where Rosabeth was petrified and Benhart was waiting in a funk. We could have done this all the way back when we first rescued Rosabeth from being a stone, but I wanted to wait a little bit for a couple of reasons. The first being, you really want to clear NPCs out of this area before you try and continue. That can be accomplished just by resting at a bonfire, but it's really important that you do. The Twin Blade is extremely powerful against single targets, especially if they don't have very high poise. You can essentially stunlock things in perpetuity. If you're lucky, a single swing of the weapon can knock somebody out. However, because that swing is so long, it does leave you open if there's more than one or two enemies on the screen. As it so happens, there are now 4. The strong attack can be helpful, but it suffers from the same problem. It leaves you open for such a long time, there's not a lot you can do when multiple enemies gang up on you. So using the Twin Blade against large crowds requires either a lot of caution, or just choose something else that's better suited to the task. So, choosing something else that's better suited to the task, we're going to switch to the Drangleic Sword. We picked this up quite some time ago, back when we killed the Pursuer and picked up the rest of the Drangleic set, but until recently we didn't have the strength or dexterity to effectively wield it. It's unique among greatswords because it scales off of dexterity. There are a couple that do this, but most by and large will scale off of strength because they're giant slabs of metal. Strength or dexterity is somewhat immaterial because this weapon will still help cleave through wide swathes of enemies. Not quite as wide as an ultra great sword, but those have their own pros and cons. Now this is the Pyromancy Immolation. I showed it off a little bit in the stream when I was at Belfry Soul. In exchange for some significant damage over time upon yourself, you gain a damage over time aura of fire damage to all surrounding enemies. It's reasonably powerful. However, it has a drawback. The fire can kill you. I just don't understand. This was such an effective strategy when the Smelter Demon used it. Moral of the story, use immolation with caution. To better meet this challenge, I think we should probably switch out to a more appropriate pyromancy, one that will probably not kill us. No guarantees, of course, but this at least won't do direct damage to our health bar. Popping an effigy is also not a bad idea here, since our health bar maximum is getting kind of low. I would recommend for players on their first playthrough to heavily use the Ring of Binding, because otherwise you'll probably be dying enough times that you'll run out of effigies. But when you have achieved at least some familiarity and quote-unquote competence with this game, just using an effigy when you get low on max health like that is probably fine. You also have the option of trying to get yourself summoned and helping somebody beat a boss, which will also restore your humanity, so you've got options. The Ring of Binding is probably the most cost-effective for first-time players. Now, Firestorm is a much more appropriate spell for this encounter. We hardly even needed to use the physical weapon. Hiding behind that door is one last nasty surprise, a basilisk. Basilisk can shoot toxic gas that will petrify you, which is presumably what befell Rosabeth when she got stuck here. They're not very durable, and they don't do a lot of damage with their normal swipes, but you should be careful nonetheless, because petrification is an instant kill. To be perfectly honest, I don't know why this bonfire exists. You might think it's because, oh, what if you need to go back and you don't want to do that sequence again? You can just warp to the other side. Well, that would make sense, but the door on this side is also closed until you pull a lever. So, your guess is as good as mine, really. A little jumping around will reveal a couple more jail cells with these forest grotesques in them. I believe that's their official name, but diseased hollows and gross guys work just as well. When you try to open the door from this side, these hollows will come down and ambush you, and you also have to deal with the basilisk. So, to be honest, it's probably better to do it from the other side anyway. It's a strange little trap in a strange little area. It's also a little bereft of valuables. That Estus flask shard is basically the only thing worth mentioning. Alright, enemy horde taken care of. I'm going to switch back to the Twin Blade to show it off a little bit more, because it is a genuinely good weapon. I have no explanation for this. It's been like this every time I've come through this area on every playthrough. Now, another weakness of the Twin Blade is that its one-handed attack is really bad. It doesn't do very much damage, it doesn't come out very quickly. It's just, you should two-hand this thing or just not use it at all. It also has very low backstab and critical hit damage, so it's kind of a one-trick pony. Now, the trick it does perform is pretty darn good, so don't let that dissuade you if you think it looks cool. This path introduces a new kind of forest grotesque, one that throws rocks at you. They're really annoying, to be perfectly honest, because the rocks are very silent coming out, because throwing a rock doesn't make much noise until it hits something, like, say, your head. So, if you're engaged otherwise, or you're trading blows, then it's pretty easy to get nailed by a couple rocks. They don't hurt too bad, but they can knock you out of animations and leave you vulnerable to retaliation from any forest grotesques that are on the ground. All in all, though, these are not very threatening enemies. The most difficult encounter with them is probably the one in that area leading out of Majula. Since you never really have to fight more than 2 or 3 at a time here, this is a fairly trivial area to get through if you can not get beamed in the head with rocks. Work in progress for me. If I were to offer myself a suggestion, I would say that I should probably try rolling to the side and not into them. I only have so many invincibility frames, after all. Now, this bonfire is perfectly reasonably placed and is very useful. You can tell by the name, the Ruined Fork Road, is that it has 3 different paths leading to different areas. So you'll be coming back here a lot, and a convenient warp point is very much appreciated.
Is that a show? Here to see, however.
Our Estes Flask collection is getting to be pretty big at the moment. 8 is nothing to sneeze at. Generally speaking, when you die in this game, it's not because you ran out of healing, but because you didn't have a chance to before something clocked you in the head. Oh, hello.
Just wait, you dirty rat. I remember you. Don't you scare me like that. I thought you were him. That bastard with the ring lives in Brightstone Cove down the way. I'm gonna find him and settle the score. Nobody insults me like that. For the good of the world and for my own honour. I won't let that bastard live another day. For the good of the...
Okay. Cool. Going this way now, away from you. It's not entirely too hard to believe that Kale's recollection of Creighton as a serial killer is all too believable. The red tearstone ring is a unique little accessory that will increase your physical attack power by a pretty significant margin when you have low health. If you played Paper Mario, it's sort of like a Danger Mario build. Maybe we should knock? Oh, it's one of those doors, like the one we found in the fort. Okay, no go this way. The ring is nice, though. I might get some use out of that later. The red tearstone ring can be useful for builds that sort of eschew safety. You can actually just start out like completely hollowed with 50% max health, get hit once, and then you're already at the threshold. So if you're confident in your dodging ability, then certainly it will speed up a lot of fights. But it's called a Danger Mario build for a weakness. For a reason, not a weakness. Its weakness is if you get hit once, you're over. It is done. Return to the last bonfire and do not pass go. This area hurts a little bit for enemy variety. So far we've only encountered these gross-looking things. Generally speaking, you can tell which ones are going to throw rocks and which aren't by whether or not they're wielding those big stone bony club things. They have a tendency to drop basic weapons like the mace and the broadsword, so if you're feeling cheap, then farming these guys up for those is not an awful idea, I guess. You could just buy them from like Lenegrast or something, but I'm not one to tell you your business. We got another Ring of Life protection from that corpse, which is always helpful. You can carry multiple copies of any ring. Most of the time this is useless, but with certain rings, especially ones that are prone to breakage, it can be useful to have a backup. Speaking of having a backup, there appears to be a backup Flexile sentry out in the middle of nowhere here. Now this thing's poise is a little too high to stagger conventionally. We'd need some definite help with that. But even so, given that he's only one guy, and his attacks are quite spaced out. The Twin Blade does a real number on him. He drops some very valuable Twinkling Titanite. And I would recommend engaging him in the area that he spawns, because that grotesque can come down and give you some trouble. He also guards the Dragon Slayer Crescent Axe. It's another Twinkling Titanite weapon, and I'm not especially impressed with it. Like, it's fine for what it is. But there is a lot of competition for weapons that are upgraded with Twinkling Titanite, so I would not pick this one. Shrine of Winter. The door is on my case too? I'm looking for my... Oh. Open up. Open up, you piece of crap door. Alright, can't go that way. It's worth noting that if we could simply find it within ourselves to clamber over that rubbish that was by the Crescent Axe, we could probably just bypass that door entirely. But we are bound to the laws of this world, and we have no choice but to accept them. With those two wings explored and leading nowhere, we have no choice but to go through the path that Creighton is sitting by. We'll do that next time, because that leads into a fairly lengthy sequence before we can get to a bonfire. Until then, thank you for watching. Hopefully at some point we can find a use for immolation. Hopefully. Don't hold your breath. It's very perilous. In fact, I wouldn't recommend using it yourself. Really, it's just a bad idea.